Moving on to item number 11, first reading, Commission Policy 33, Fisheries Management Program, Commissioner and APRP Committee Chairman David McNinch and Fisheries Division Administrator John Schoberg for possible action. The Commission will conduct a first reading on Policy 33, Fisheries Management Program. The committee recommends updating the policy with current requirements and Fisheries Division plans will be considered. The Commission may take action on the committee's recommended changes to Policy 33. Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to punt to Mr. Schoberg again and let him follow up. This one's a little bit broader, and again, I think most of the proposed changes had to do with updating and recognizing the fish programs for where it's at now from many years ago. So.
Mr. Schoberg.
For the record, John Schoberg, Fisheries Division Administrator. Thank you, Commissioner McNinch. Chairman Wallace and Commissioners, I will just walk through this. It's fairly lengthy. I'll try and move fairly quickly through this, and please let me know if you have any questions. More or less section by section. Under purpose, we did identify, again, we had a couple of minor typos in here that got missed until after we'd sent this out for support material. Under the first paragraph, purpose, that should say Fisheries Division rather than Fisheries Bureau. At the end of the second sentence, or the last sentence. Under background, those were just some language updates, correcting some current numbers, bringing some numbers up current, and just some general editorial to remove some peculiar language. Under policies, aquaculture, there's some minor language changes there just to detail that section. The previous section on amphibians, we had recommended deleting, and that reference to that will move back to the section on native aquatic species, since those are managed jointly under the same program, under the Native Aquatic Species Program within the Fisheries Division. Angler access just has some minor language updates there.
I got a question on that one.
Yes.
Just while we're in that section, John, under angler access, I know the department has done some really good work in terms of providing access in urban areas, especially with the urban ponds. And it just seemed to me like we maybe are missing an opportunity to say something about that as a new bullet specific to urban opportunities, because you guys have done a tremendous job in that arena.
And again, for the record, Division Administrator John Schoberg, Commissioner Drew, that would be fine if you want to add language. I think that is an important point, and we continue to look for opportunities to expand that urban fishing program in communities all over the state. We've had a lot of success, but all the support that we can get, the better it would be. By note, I know we've had some comment relative to Winnemucca. There's been some delays, but working with partners, we expect that that new Winnemucca urban fishing pond will be fully online in time for next spring and the fishing season, which will be our newest urban pond facility in the state. And I would certainly entertain any suggestions as to language.
I'll roll that around as you're going. So.
Okay. Moving on, biological control of aquatic vegetation. This is essentially the same as the previous version of the policy, just with some language updates. Same thing for boating access. On page 4, the section on fish disease, we recommend deleting that because fish disease is currently, since this was originally developed, we have division program and procedure that provides guidance relative to fish disease, so this is somewhat superfluous and duplicative of existing internal policy for the department that didn't exist in the past. Fisheries management planning, again, just some language updates. Fisheries rehabilitation, some language updates, but continuing the emphasis on the importance of the ability to use tools such as rotenone and other fish toxicants, both for restoration of sport fisheries, and also for recovery of listed species, both non-game fishes and native sport fish. Fishing regulations. This is essentially the same with the addition of a bullet recommending that where we can, we focus on simplification of regulations to benefit anglers. And that was a suggestion we made to add that bullet, worded as the commission pleases. But moving forward, we see that as an important attribute where it doesn't affect our ability to have effective regulations for management purposes. If we can make it as less confusing as possible, it's beneficial to our customers. The fish stocking section, beginning at the bottom of page 5, again, similar to fish disease, we recommended removing this because we have division, program, and procedure that's current and updated that addresses this in terms of internal policy for how we conduct those activities.
Yeah, go ahead.
Management.
Commissioner Drew has a quick question for you.
I'm sorry.
John, while we're on that one, you mentioned moving fish stocking. Are you thinking like new policy or just deleting it and sticking with the internal policies and plans?
It's the pleasure of the commission, but we feel that we have adequate guidance in place based on our internal policies and program documents that provide that guidance that was previously provided by this commission policy. So this essentially just duplicates existing division policy that's been developed and updated frequently as recently as last year. Management of native non-game aquatic species. Again, this addresses our much more extensive native aquatic species program than we had when this policy was originally developed. Updates that language and includes the reference to native amphibians. On native trout management, there is, on page 7, I do have one correction in the first sentence. It says 6 species of trout or char. We would recommend changing that to say 6 species of salmonids, because we have 5 native trout and native whitefish, and the native whitefish is a salmonid, but it's not a char. So that would just clean up that language and make it accurate. Beyond that, there's just some language updates here. Again, in the 4th bullet, it references back to the LCT policy in encouraging the use of triploid rainbow trout in LCT historic and potential recovery waters. And then last, we have replaced the existing aquatic, what was called the nuisance aquatic species section, with an aquatic invasive species section that brings this policy up to speed relative to where we are with that program today. And that is a very quick tour of the changes, and I would be happy to entertain any questions, discussion, recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Any questions from the commission? Hearing none, this is an action item. I'll take it out for public comment in Elko.
No comment in Elko.
Public comment in Reno.
No comment in Reno.
And public comment in Las Vegas. Come on up, Paul.
Paul Dixon, Clark Cab. The only comment that our cab had, we liked all the changes in here, was that the way the policy is written now is that if you have a prohibited fish but it's in a closed body of water, that it's acceptable, and we were thinking that prohibited or invasive species of fish should be prohibited everywhere, with the exception of the grass carp, the triploid back grass carp, which is used for other things. But I just wanted, that was the only thing we had as a change, or suggested change to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Further public comment in Las Vegas? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for further discussion or a motion.
I have a comment.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I think one of the things when we were in Elko and
looking at license simplification, one of the things was simplifying licensing procedures and regulations to reduce barriers to entry. And since if this is going to be our commission policy on the fishing regulations on the bullet point for simplification, I like how it's worded to reduce confusion and increase compliance. But I think that should be the policy of the commission to simplify fishing regulations to reduce the confusion, increase compliance, and either increase participation or reduce barriers to entry by new anglers. So I think in a broad policy statement, I'd like to see that incorporated into this. So that would be on page 5 under the heading fishing regulations, the second bullet point. The proposed language currently reads, the simplification of fishing regulations is encouraged where effective implementation can still be ensured to reduce confusion and increase compliance by anglers. I would just do something to the effect of to reduce confusion, increase compliance by anglers, and reduce barriers to entry by new anglers. Something to that effect.
Got it.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Commissioner Hubbs.
I actually have a comment too, and it kind of goes with Paul Dixon's comment. I have that area flagged as well. I guess to me, after I read this section, it led me to NAC 503.560 to kind of research the definitions, because I didn't know, like, for instance, if there was a definition for a prohibited species and what a closed water system really was as well. And I thought it was unclear. I have it flagged from, from a layman's perspective as not knowing what that means, like what is a closed water system and where can these species be, because they can be quite detrimental, right, if they get out into areas sometimes, and they can cause a lot of problems. And I don't see the definitions in the NAC right now, and I don't know if there could be or we could clarify in some way.
John.
Commissioner Hubbs, for the record, John Schoberg, Administrator, Fisheries Division. I would particularly reference, I believe it's NAC 503.110 is, if I'm correct, I believe that's the list of prohibited species. And is that the right?
It's that one is. It might be. I haven't looked. I was just looking in the basic definitions first.
Yeah.
So that one's restrictions on importation,
Exactly.
transportation, and possession of certain species.
That is it, and that is where our prohibited species are listed by species. And there's an extensive list of restrictions on the end of that, and that was one of the comments I wanted to make, was relative to prohibited species and how the policy addresses that. That's already in regulation. So I guess it's the pleasure of the commission if you feel a need to reinforce that, but those prohibitions on the use of and possession of prohibited species are already in NAC, and there's fairly extensive at the end past the list of species relative to the limited ability to use those. Just because of statute, we normally would never permit a prohibited species except under certain circumstances. There is an exception for aquaculture, but the responsibility based on both regulation and process for those permits puts a pretty heavy burden on anyone who applies for a commercial permit to demonstrate containment and closed systems where they might be, producing them commercially either as a food fish or for some other purpose. So there's a fairly extensive body of regulation that already addresses the use of that suite of species that are on our prohibited list. And again, there are exceptions for things like exhibits, display, scientific use. For example, African cloud frogs are a prohibited species, but we get several research permit requests a year from UNLV for researchers that are using them for various purposes, and it's highly restricted. And other species where we have similar circumstances.
Further questions from the commission? Commissioner Drew.
So John, we talked on page 3 about angler access and urban fisheries. And I guess something I might recommend is a new bullet that says something as simple as seek opportunities to expand and implement urban fisheries based on success of this program. Just something as simple as that.
Okay, we certainly could come up with some sample language for your consideration.
Further comments from the commission?
I had a question, and I couldn't remember, but I noticed on page 6 on the management of native non-game aquatic species, there's the reference to the Nevada Wildlife Action Plan. Does that action plan, does that address non-game and game species?
Commissioner Johnson, the short answer is yes.
Okay.
It addresses species of conservation priority or concern, and that includes some game species as well as a broad spectrum of non-game species. So there are certain game fish in there, like Lahontan cutthroat trout, I believe Bonneville cutthroat trout may be in there, or Yellowstone, and some terrestrial species as well. So yes, it covers a broad spectrum of species. It's not limited to just non-game.
And then I guess my question was then, because I know, Nevada and the department put this plan together, should there be a broad policy statement that the management of all, I like the reference to the Nevada Wildlife Action Plan on the management of native non-game aquatic species, but should there also be the policy of the management of the game species should also be in accordance with the Wildlife Action Plan? I don't know where it would go in here, but maybe that's not a needed statement, but it seems that would be the policy of this commission. Or at least I'm kind of speaking for myself, that, your broad policy is that when we're talking about the fisheries management program would certainly be in accordance and consistent with the Wildlife Action Plan, as mentioned here with respect to the native non-game aquatic species, but certainly with any other species to which that action plan applies.
Again, for the record, Division Administrator John Schoberg, in terms of aquatic game species, we do have the native trout management section on the following page, and essentially all of our aquatic game species that would be species of concern are salmonids.
Okay.
And so we do have a section that addresses native trout management and prioritizes that as a focus. So that includes both bull trout and Lahontan cutthroat trout that are ESA listed, as well as other native salmonids of concern, which are essentially the aquatic game species that would fall under that category.
So if I look then on page 7, and we have the 6 species of trout or char, but I know we're changing that to salmonids. So when we get to the end of that paragraph, these species need active long-term species management programs implemented in coordination with federal recovery plans, range-wide conservation agreements, and other conservation planning guidance we could put in there, such as the Nevada Wildlife Action Plan?
Certainly, and I think that would be appropriate. And the only non-trout is mountain whitefish, and I think it's identified in the Wildlife Action Plan, but there's 68 aquatic species. I have to go back and look.
Understood.
I don't remember.
Further questions or comments from the commission? Hearing none, I guess I'd be looking for a motion to move this on for the second reading that would include quite a few changes that we've talked about today, and give direction to staff of where we need to be for the second reading.
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman, one more very minor typo that I forgot to mention. On page 8, at the bottom of page 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth bullet, it should say development of strategies to prevent the introduction, not development of strategies to prevent to introduction. So the second two should be a D. And that was the other very minor typo that we found. Sorry, misstep.
No problem. Mr. McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and so I'll take a swing at it. So I'll make a motion that we move the proposed language for Commission Policy 33 to a second reading with the proposed modifications in mind. Bring it back from staff. On the first page, under purpose, changing bureau to division, the last word of the paragraph. On page 3, under Angler Access, adding a bullet point referencing urban opportunities, so something along the lines of seeking opportunity to expand and implement fisheries to benefit the program, kind of the urban opportunity concept. Adding on page 5, second bullet point under fishing regulations, adding language, something along the lines of, the line might read, the simplification of fishing regulations is encouraged where effective implementation can still be ensured to reduce confusion, increase compliance with anglers, and reduce barriers to entry by new anglers. On page 7, under native trout management, 6 species of trout or char would be changed to 6 species of salmonids. And at the end of that paragraph, before the bullet points, referencing such as the Nevada Wildlife Action Plans, when talking about recovery plans, coordination with recovery plans and mentioning plans. And on page 8, under the 4th bullet point, under aquatic invasive species, the change that you just suggested, development of strategies to prevent the introduction rather than to.
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner McNinch and a second by Vice Chairman Johnston. Is the commission clear with the recommendations back to the department for the second reading? I'll call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously.